Jack Justice. This is my video recorded analysis submission. My central point of emphasis for this evaluation and assessment is going to be looking at education and how it is a non-neutral system today. In our course readings and our materials, I have seen that education is rooted in politics, economics, as well as specific cultural narratives. When assessing the current day system, it is shaped by all of these different influences and forms of power. This leads to equity and inclusion being overlooked in the classrooms. In the course of this reflection, I am going to pinpoint Spring's main points and ideas that he addresses in the text. I will then identify what he has left out. Lastly, I will indicate how I plan to implement his knowledge and insights into my own teaching practices as an educator. First, I'd like to acknowledge that my assessment and analysis today will be looking firmly at chapters 1 and 2 of Joel Spring's textbook. The theme of these two chapters is cultural wars. In the text, Spring states that schools often become sites of political struggle where groups compete to determine what is taught. This is the first form of influence that promotes education as a non neutral classroom, which is politics. In the reading, Spring argues that schools spaces are becoming a place where political agendas and ideologies are being expressed and reinforced. In the text, it mentions how this can be accomplished in the classroom. A few examples of this could include what is taught in the classroom, what books are utilized, as well as what historical events and topics are spoken about and emphasized in the curriculum. All of these can be shaped by politics, beliefs, as well as the specific values of the party or group. Spring references cultural wars because in our society today, different groups fight and compete to control what is being taught inside of the classroom. Also connecting with the aspects of political effects on education is economics. In the text, Spring highlights how education has become a servant in the economy. In chapter 1 reading, it highlights how schools help prepare students not only for the real world, but for the workforce. Some examples of this in our education system today include standardized testing, intro to career programs, as well as funding programs that help students continue their education to grow specific skills for a specific field. Spring argues that instead of developing students' critical thinking skills, our education system today strives to make students more suitable and more efficient for their future work in the workforce. This makes me think of our education system today and its purpose. Are we teaching students to think freely, or are we trying to simply make sure that these students fit into the system? The last form of influence that I'll be looking at is cultural narratives. In the text, it states that schools' actions and values reflect and transmit the dominant culture in the group. For example, in our education system today, we see this when schools pass down societal norms to their students. This means to transmit them. This helps put on display that the dominant narratives that are prevalent in our school system today ultimately marginalize other groups of students. For example, in our school system today, the normal stories and events that are spoken about in our history subjects are often in reference to white middle class individuals. Sadly, as a result of this, the contributions and experiences of other diverse groups are overlooked. So, we see this in our education today. And this references and highlights the inequities and unfairness that is existent in our education system. I firmly agree with Spring on this subject matter because I believe that schools not only transmit knowledge to their students, but also transmit culture. From my field experiences as well as this course, I have learned that when one dominant culture is represented in the curriculum and others are overlooked, it is very difficult for all the students in the classroom to be able to engage critically with the material and content because they do not see themselves reflected in the curriculum. Next, I'll be looking at what Joel Spring fails to recognize in the text. I believe that Joel Spring fails to disclose the actions and strategies teachers can take in order to disrupt and combat this trend of classrooms and schools only reflecting the dominant culture. I believe this is a missed opportunity for educators to grow and develop into stronger innovators and reformers. In addition, I believe that Spring fails to focus on the power an individual and a community has, either to resist or to reshape these forces or ways of thinking. I strongly believe that this connects with the culturally responsive teaching practice. For example, Teachers can implement community nights or events that allow for their families and students to showcase their forms of culture and their beliefs. I believe this will allow each and every student to have a chance to express themselves in their community and their lived experiences. This will ultimately foster a collaborative and communicative environment for the students and the families in the learning process. I will be now looking at how I plan to integrate culturally sustaining pedagogy into my future classroom in practice as an educator. I plan to use the culturally sustaining approach in numerous ways. This means that each and every day, when I design and deliver lessons, I will make sure to affirm the students' identities as well as challenge the dominant narratives. One example of how I plan to incorporate this into my future classroom is by ensuring that my materials represent diverse cultural perspectives and voices, not only the dominant narrative that exists in the classroom. Another example is how I plan to do this is by connecting my students' learning to their real world experiences. If I'm able to do this, then I can ensure that the students see that politics, economics, and cultures all intersect in their daily lives. This will allow the students to combat the systemic biases that exist that Spring ultimately decoded in the text. In conclusion, Joel Spring in Chapter 1 provides a deep critical analysis of how education in the United States is affected by politics, narratives, as well as economics. He emphasizes to the readers to truly understand and examine these aspects and factors to firmly identify what their impact is on the educational practices and policies. As educators, it is vital that we acknowledge and understand these influences in order to create a classroom environment that promotes equity and inclusion.